I'm Brian McCreath at GBH in Boston. I'm with composer Gabriel Bouche Caro. Gabriel, thanks for spending a little time with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Your piece is Ni fu ni fa los cuentos de siempre. And there's a lot in that title that gives us context for the music you've written. I wonder if you can just give us that context, translate the title, and tell us a little bit about where it comes from.
The term ni fu ni fa is kind of a colloquialism back home in Puerto Rico. That means neither here nor there, something kind of in the in-between, right? And the piece deals with the idea of the status of the island, which is something that has historically been at the forefront of politics. And historically, it's always been ni fu ni fa, neither here nor there. And for this piece, I take these terms that come from a book called United States of Banana by Puerto Rican author Janina Brashi. And she uses these three terms to describe the different the different status options that we have. So Washy stands for statehood. Wishy stands for the freely associated state, which is what we have now, otherwise known as the colony. And Wishy stands for independence. And what we have now, which is the colony or the freely associated state, as people like to say, is kind of neither here nor there, because that is the reality that we have been living in as an island for now over 60 some odd years or more.
Mm-hmm. And it's an experience, a way of living that those of us who have always lived on the mainland kind of almost can't relate to. It must be so deeply part of your personhood living in Puerto Rico, yeah, that sense of neither here nor there is not something that most of us would really probably understand.
Yeah, I don't think that anyone can quite understand the situation if you're not born and raised on the island. Even speaking to other Latin American people that come to the U.S., it's a completely different situation. We are born with a passport, but there are nuances. When we are born, we get a passport, but there are nuances in the relationship that things get taken as well. And it's not a one-to-one ratio of give and take. It hasn't been historically. And there are people that view it, the way to fix it is either washy or wishy, as Janina says in her book, and as I say in my piece. But the consensus recently is that wishy-washy gets you nowhere.
Yeah.
And that's true in life, and that's true in our system.
And so, is this approach to creating music based in that reality? Is that something that is an area you've explored before creatively, or did this opportunity with MIFA and with the Victory Players open up this opportunity for you to express these different statuses of Puerto Rico?
I think that for me, I've always had this, the idea of Puerto Rican identity in my music, but I've always come at it from a different perspective. Because as you see with this project, there are some of the composers that choose to portray the musical culture of Puerto Rico more directly and more clearly, with direct influence from genres of music back home or quotations or things of that nature. I've always kind of taken the side route, per se, because the music that was born out of me didn't want to be so on the nose. I kind of take all those influences and just pass them through this filter that what comes out is, I can tell that music is there, but for a listener, just any person listening to the piece, you can't quite say, oh, this is an element of bomba, or this is an element of salsa, or this is even an element of rock, or anything that is influential to me, but they're all there. And I think that also has to do with the upbringing on the island and the multi sensorial thing that we have not only with our own culture but with the bombardment of culture from the US that also shapes how at least some of the people in Puerto Rico think. I was speaking Spanish English as well, Spanish and English when I was 6 or 7, just like I am now. And American TV, American music, mixed with Puerto Rican music and it creates this new culture that is really not existent anywhere else, and therefore I produce something that is not existent anywhere else, but even more so because it's only my vision of my experience.
Sure. And that sort of mystery of what feeds into the music, I think what I hear, especially in the first movement, Washy, you do something that's really it's so intriguing by having fragmentary melodies show up and disappear. It's like an apparition almost. I don't know if that's exactly what you meant for that to be, but it's that experience of something fleeting. And so it's almost like in the midst of a sort of sound landscape that's not fully defined. These moments of fragmentary melody arrive, give us something we think we can hold on to, and then it's gone. And I don't know if that's kind of what you were going for, but the effect is a little bit, it's just really intriguing. It's fascinating.
Well, there's something to that in the sense that in my portrayal of this idea of Washy or statehood, I'm trying to portray the idea of things are not quite what they seem.
Okay.
And there are a lot of things that pop up that are kind of this imitation of old colonial drum and fife music that are meant to be kind of ironic in a way to say, this is the music of the days that built this, but this is no longer the case. Like, we don't live in this time. We don't live in these ideals anymore. And from the point of view of my upbringing, I see this as something that portrays itself to be strong and direct and kind of unbreakable or unshakable in some way, but it can just as quickly dissipate and dissolve into this fragmentary kind of dissolution of an idea, which is kind of what I'm trying somewhat to achieve when these melodies come in and out, especially in the winds in that first movement.
Yeah. And so what that makes me think is, or maybe perceive, is that Washy and the idea of independence, your music is kind of a reaction to that idea more than an expression of the idea.
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly. I'm mostly reacting to my feelings upon the idea of a movement per se, or a political movement, or a status movement. So in that first movement, I'm commenting on my interpretation of what it would be like for Puerto Rico that desires or achieves statehood.
And is it the same for then the other movements, wishy-washy and for wishy?
Yeah.
That they're reactions to these concepts more than they are expressions of those concepts.
Yes, exactly. I think they're all the movements in the piece are my reaction or my kind of musical way of expressing how I feel about that position. Yeah.
What's fascinating about the project El Puerto Rico that you're part of here is the variety of perspectives on the Puerto Rican experience brought to the project by these other composers, and yours. I don't know if it's the most political, but it's right there with any of the others that might be political. Yeah. It considers what Puerto Rico is as an entity, and so I wonder, in your experience now with this sort of short-lived community of the project. Whether some of these other perspectives have affected the way that you think about these aspects of Puerto Rico as an entity.
I think what is most impactful is just seeing the variety in thinking.
Yeah.
Not necessarily being swayed one way or the other.
Sure.
But seeing that there are so many, which is something that we all know, but there are so many nuances to this that go way above our heads, even if we want to be the most informed that we can.
Yeah.
And my personal relationship to the themes that I bring up in my piece are definitely not shared by everyone, and this piece doesn't make an explicit kind of this is what I want, but I know what that is. Yeah. But again, I don't feel the need to be so kind of on the nose with that.
Yeah.
And it also shows me, this whole project is that something that I also learned living in New York after living on the island, that there are so many people that identify as a Puerto Rican in a different way. And what that means to me is completely different to what it means to someone else. And someone that is born in New York and lives their Puerto Ricanness does not understand it how I understand it. And I, that I'm born on the island and lived almost my whole life there, how I live my Puerto Ricanness is not how they live theirs. But as I've encountered more people, more situations, I've grown to be way more empathetic of these situations, because none of them are easy.
I think that's, if I might say, I mean, that's part of the experience of hearing your music, is that none of this is easy. None of these statuses is actually the answer that everybody would consider the best answer.
Yeah.
So has the experience of writing this piece and working with these musicians propelled you to sort of new ideas that you might go with for your next piece that even might relate or grow out of this piece?
Yeah, I'm in a working collaboration right now with this author from the book United States of Banana, with Janina, and she deals a lot with this idea of identity and our place within the colonial nature of our space, right? And I'm also very much more in kind of a track where I'm following this idea of who we are, or who I perceive we are, and give my point of view as to who I think we are as a people, and why I think we are important.
I'll look forward to it. That sounds great. Gabriel Bouche Caro, thank you so much for talking about this fantastic music with me.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.